Welcome to a sports betting podcast from pregame.com for the week of February 12th, 2010. I'm your host, RJ Bell. I'm joined by Marco D'Angelo, 30 years in the business, Vegas runner, genuine professional bettor, star of the CNBC special on gambling. This is segment 3 of 4, big game preview in college basketball. We're going to Sunday. We've got Syracuse and Louisville. Okay, so what we do a little bit differently during basketball is we're taping this on Thursday. So we've got two different kinds of handicappers here. One is VR, who's a value capper. He's looking for the best number. He's looking for a number that's off from what he thinks the number should be. And you get that number from your own handicapping, from your connections with bookies,
Correct.
From your connections with batters. Now Marco's a little bit different, or a lot different, where he is what you call mostly a trap game handicapper. Now, he'll only play the trap games in which there's value, but he wants to find a game where the bookie is trying to force you to bet one way, and it's almost like The Godfather. It's an offer you can't refuse. You want to go the other way because you want to be on the side of the bookies. Okay, so what we do with these games is VR is going to give us what we call the true line on the game. Because remember, the line's not even out yet. Most good handicappers handicap before the line even comes out. You're going to tell us what you think the line should be to split the result. We call that a true line. And then you're going to give us what you think the fair line is, which would split the betting action. And based upon these two numbers, we can get a real sense of how to be a bettor. So specifically, Louisville at Syracuse, what's the true line, VR, from your handicap?
I made Syracuse a 10.5-point home favorite, and I set the total at 151.
Okay, now we had talked about, you go about this in two ways. One, you've got power rankings.
Correct.
Which is a simple mathematical, home field or home court value is considered. You subtract the amounts and then you get a number.
Correct.
And then you make adjustments for things like matchups, situations like scheduling, etc.
Right.
So how did you come to your 10.5?
The 10.5 is after I broke down the matchup. That's that final number, not just based on the strength of each team.
No, okay, understood. And I was just, as we move forward in the weeks to come, I'm interested as a bettor to hear what your original power ranking numbers are and any adjustments that you made. Okay, so Marco, what do you think the fair line is that would split the action on this game?
I think Vegas will bring this game out at 9, is what I have it at.
Okay, so if that's the case, then there's going to be some value on Syracuse. Let's assume the line's 10 for the sake of discussion. Okay, now I'm going to actually make my free pick on this game. So maybe I should. I'm going to play Syracuse. Maybe we should make it 9.5 now. Okay, so Marco, you jump out. What jumps out at you from a handicapping angle here?
Well, Syracuse had a big game middle of the week. They played Connecticut. And that was the first meeting that they played since the epic 6 overtime game last year, if you remember, in the conference championship, the Big East tournament. This was a game that was a big game for both teams. Syracuse won but did not cover. So they were a bigger favorite than they will be on Saturday, and they didn't cover. I think that the intensity of that game plus the look ahead to Louisville on Saturday makes that the line is why I'm putting in the line coming out at a little bit lower than Vegas runner, that Vegas will adjust it. It's going to come out at 9. I tend to agree with you. My lean in the game is to Syracuse because I think you're going to get a better effort out of them on Saturday against Louisville. That was a bigger game for Connecticut than it was for Syracuse the other night.
Okay, so now, unless I'm mistaken, Syracuse was winning by even more against Connecticut, and then I think Connecticut outscored them like 6 out of the last 8 or some variation that brought the score a little bit closer, which also brings up the point of a potential misperception that, Syracuse played very close against an average UConn team. Well, maybe they played a little bit better than we thought. But your takeaway, or one of your key points, Marco, is that since Syracuse, you expected Connecticut to be very motivated for that game earlier in the week, and Syracuse not so much, that potentially the score was a little deceiving.
Right. But like you always have the discussion how teams, different levels of intensity. To me, they both were intense for this game, but because Connecticut was the loser in that 6 overtime epic, they're the one that had a little bit more of a push in the rematch.
Well, not to mention too is Connecticut's fighting to get in the NCAA tournament. I mean, which right now doesn't look like they're going to make it, unless I'm mistaken. And some people might be saying, well, why are we talking Connecticut? Because the way that we assess what happened in the Syracuse-Connecticut game helps us decide where the value is in this game. All right, so what jumps out at you, VR?
Well, Louisville plays it tonight as well. They play St. John's.
On Thursday night.
Right, on the road. So then they're playing back-to-back Big East road games, which is never going to be easy for them. The biggest problems I think Louisville's going to have is that they're an up-tempo team, but they're playing a team that's even a quicker tempo team in Syracuse. Syracuse is going to run even teams that like to run to death. And I think when you play as bad of defense as Louisville plays, Syracuse is going to have an easy time putting up points. The only thing that scares me about this Syracuse team when I bet them and I need them to cover a number is they're probably one of the worst high-profile teams that can't shoot free throws. So when they're in that range below 10-point favorite, when I got to lay 7 or 8, I'm always weary because if they have that 7 or 8 point lead and they could put it away with free throws down the stretch, more times than not, you're going to be praying that they could at least hit one of the two, to get the cover.
So, Marco, we usually make fun of your pronunciations. You could tell him it's wary. You're weary when you're tired.
Wary?
Yeah, wary.
I don't have that. How is it? Wary?
Wary.
I say weary.
You're tired. Yeah. Syracuse missing the free throw. Fair enough. But that said, that's a great point because let's think about that. Because my first instinct when I heard what VR said was, well, anytime a team's missing free throws, it's a bad thing. But when do you know a team's going to be having to shoot free throws is when they're up potentially from 3 to 7, 8 points in the last 2 minutes of the game.
The cover it becomes 10.
So that's a good takeaway if you think about it. If a team's a bad free throw shooting team, laying more than 3 and less than 10 is especially precarious.
Yeah, it's huge. Where remember them Duke teams of old where they'd be laying 9, 10, 11. If they had a 6-point lead with 2.5 minutes left, 2 minutes left, you knew they were going to hit every free throw. Before you know it, it's 13.
You almost are talking me off this game, but I love that because you think about it. What is handicapping? It's sometimes you might think a team is better than people think, but most of the time people are in agreement about how good a team is. Now it becomes 2 factors. How do they match up against these teams? Well, there's really 3 factors, or there's more, but 3 jump out at me. How do the teams match up? And you make a great point about strength versus strength. When you have 2 up-tempo teams, the one who's the better up-tempo team has a real domination. I heard this on the radio recently, and I love the quote. It was from Mark Twain. He said, a swordsman is not afraid, the best swordsman in the world is not afraid of the second best swordsman, but they're afraid of someone that might come out throwing a hatchet or something because they're not ready for it, right? Is a team like Syracuse that's so good up tempo might have trouble against an old school Princeton team or some different type of team. But if you're making Syracuse comfortable and they're the best at it, that's an advantage for Syracuse. So another factor is how the teams match up. Other factors you talk about a lot are scheduling. What's the circumstances and the motivation around the game. So and then the third factor is profile. I talked about this a lot in football. Certain teams play well in certain spots. High State is an underdog. Et cetera, et cetera. And to me, we found Syracuse to be in maybe a bad profile for them, which is a favorite from 3 to 10 points in which you're going to have to hit their free throws at the end. That said, I'm going to make this half a unit prepaid.
No hedging.
I'm going to stick with it. We got 30 seconds for any closing comments.
The thing I think that Syracuse has an edge here because they played at home against UConn. They get that extra day of rest. And because they like to run, usually a team like Louisville who loves to run has a slight advantage when they go 8 deep against an unrested team. Because, Syracuse plays only 6 players and loves to run. But because they're at home, because they have that extra day of rest, I don't think that's going to be a disadvantage for them.
Good stuff. All right, that's it. Next up, we're going to be talking about our 4th game, UCLA at USC. And remember, we have a special offer. Predict the score of the Syracuse game in the YouTube comments section. If you get it exactly right, you get $100 free from pregame.com to spend at pregame.com in pregame dollars. And you can get all of our videos at pregame.tv. And if you want to download and listen, you just go to iTunes and search for pregame.com.